Next up, we have composition, the principle of the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is so simple, but I want to give you some alternative ideas about it, or at least give you something else to think about. There's no doubt in my mind that you already know what the rule of thirds is. It's just constantly mentioned as the way to set up your drawing. But if you don't know what it is, simply put, it's a way of dividing up the frame or screen into equal thirds that really just allows us to make a composition based on these distinct parts of the frame. Having your focal point or your point of interest in one of these sections or on one of these, intersections, let's say, that can usually create an image that's pleasing or interesting to look at rather than just centering things, statically in the middle. Now, the rule of thirds works. It does make a good composition, don't get me wrong. I always, check my work against the rule of thirds. However, when you're working with a storyboard panel or a suggested thumbnail, as a background artist, more often than not, your composition is already determined. And as we already discussed with regard to staging and framing, your first priority is to make space for the action. So when you hear about the rule of thirds and you're told, always place your points of interest on these points, remember that that's not always going to be applicable to the work of a background artist. I wanted to explain in this lesson that the rule of thirds, or, the magic circle or the Fibonacci, whatever, can create a pleasing image to look at. But as a background artist, you're not there to create a pleasing image in a vacuum. You're telling or helping to tell a much larger story, of which this one shot or this one scene is only a small piece. So yes, as a concept artist or an illustrator, it's a very good guideline to follow. But as I said already, we're working in production, we're creating production art. So we need to be really mindful about, where this fits in and what's required in terms of the animation. Your first decision in terms of composing the shot always needs to be, you need to decide what's the story point of this shot or this scene. And sometimes placing your focal point in the center is actually more important to the story point. So as a very, very broad sort of rule of thumb or guideline here, a centrally composed shot can sometimes be read as being more organized. It can imply tradition, stability, the status quo. Whereas a composition that favors just one side or other of the screen implies a dynamic scene, a sense of conflict even, or a sense of journey and excitement. So remember that in composing your art, you want to support the story point, and you can artfully do that using framing to point the viewer's eye towards the action and following the composition that's set up in the storyboard that prioritizes where that action is.